Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and this will be another Sharks weekly recap, this time of week 24. We're approaching the end of the regular season, just a couple weeks left, and the Sharks are not really in form at the moment. This is, with these 3 games lost, a 5-game losing streak for them, and it started off with a very important matchup against the Vegas Golden Knights. The Sharks were somewhat shorthanded, missing Erik Karlsson and Joe Pavelski, obviously 2 key players. And while this game was slightly closer than the score might indicate, it was still a pretty bad loss to this team that currently finds themselves right behind the Sharks in the standings, 7-3. The Sharks then went on to a road trip back-to-back against the Kings and the Ducks, 2 games that were certainly winnable, certainly for the taking for the Sharks, as these 2 teams find themselves right at the bottom of the Western Conference. But the Sharks, even more shorthanded here against the Kings, end up getting outplayed by this team from LA. They end up losing it 4-2 after they came into the third period with a 2-1 lead. That extended the losing streak to 4 games. Sharks the next day, they got the return of Logan Couture, who had missed the previous game, and while the Sharks were more competitive in this one, they still ended up dropping it in overtime to the Ducks, 4-3. So the Sharks only claiming 1 of a possible 6 points this week. They fell somewhat beyond reach of the Calgary Flames. They are now in reach of the Vegas Golden Knights, so a pretty bad week here for the Sharks in general, and that also translates to the offensive performers. Leading the way was Brent Burns, 0 goals, 3 assists for 3 points. That does give him a career high in points with 77. Then it was Vlasic, who for the second time in a row led the team in points, technically tied with Burns. 0 goals, 3 assists for him for 24 points. He was also really getting his plus-minus back up there. For a while, he was one of the worst plus-minus on the Sharks. Now he's only at still not great, but more respectable -5. We'll see if he'll actually be able to even get back to even by the end of the regular season. And then it was Logan Couture, 2 goals, 0 assists for him, 2 points for 64 points on the season. Both of those goals coming in the game against the Golden Knights. Of course, he did miss the game against the Kings, so can't really fault him for that. Joe Thornton, a goal and an assist for him, 45 points on the year at the moment. Kevin Labanc, with his 2 assists, hits the 50-point mark for the first time in his career, as well as Gustav Nyquist, 2 assists, getting up to 55 points. For the news of the week, the injury update. The Sharks, as I said, shorthanded this week, dealing with multiple injuries. First one was Logan Couture, not real injury, mostly just flu-like symptoms. Ended up keeping him out for the game against the Kings, but he returned for the game against the Ducks. Shouldn't really be too much of a hindrance to him, especially with the couple days rest they had before tonight's game. Next would be Joe Pavelski, who's somewhat close to a return. He's moved into the territory of, if it was a playoff game, he'd probably play. My guess is Pavelski does not get the game tonight. He probably won't get the game on Thursday either against the Blackhawks, but my best bet would that he does end up returning for the back-to-back against the Flames and the Golden Knights. I think the Sharks could really use their captain for those 2 big games. Next would be Erik Karlsson, who's probably the next closest to return. He is he's skating. He seems like his return is in reach. I don't think he's going to play tonight. I don't think he's going to play on Thursday. I felt like his original target goal was to play the back-to-back against the Flames and the Golden Knights. I don't know if that will happen, especially since those are bound to be some heavy games. I don't know if Erik Karlsson wants to perform in a heavy game at this point to risk re-aggravating something, so he might end up missing those 2 and then get the last 3 games of the season, or maybe the last 2 games of the season, but I do hope he does get at least a couple before the playoffs. And then finally, Radim Simek. He had, I believe, surgery at some point this week, much earlier this week. So he's not going to play any games until the end of the regular season. He's probably not going to play anything in the playoffs except for unless the Sharks go really, really late, at which point, since Simek isn't necessarily the most important player, it's not like if Sidney Crosby had gotten injured and then came back, you have to put him back into the lineup. I assume if the Sharks are to, let's say, make it to the Stanley Cup Finals with, let's say, Tim Heed taking Simek's spot, I don't think Simek ends up taking back Heed's spot. If he does return from this knee injury, I feel like we've probably seen his last game for the Sharks this season. Next is Vegas, not to talk about the team specifically, but the fact that the Sharks seem to be headed crash course for a first-round matchup against this team, probably every Sharks fan's nightmare scenario. I'm sure there are some people who might even say that the Sharks would have been better off with the Tampa Bay Lightning, who of course are having a historic season at the moment, just because the Vegas Golden Knights just seem to be this sort of mental block for the Sharks, but the Sharks find themselves 6 points behind the Flames with just 7 games left. They're also much too far out of reach of the Coyotes, lose, so they're not going to drop out of the top 3 spot in the Pacific Division. And so right now, if it's second or if it's third place, they seem like they're going to play the Vegas Golden Knights. It's technically possible they still pass the Flames, since the Sharks do have a matchup against them, meaning a win there would put them to within 4 points. But I feel like one more loss for the Sharks, let's say tonight, and then one more win for the Flames, at that point the Sharks would most likely be completely locked into that first round matchup against Vegas. And I guess the only thing that you could take solace in is, that cliche saying of you have to beat the best to be the best. And that's probably what Peter DeBoer is going to say to his team when they finally do get to that first round matchup. Next, I will talk about Martin Jones, as of course the fact that the Sharks went on a 5-game losing streak. Most Sharks fans were well aware of Jones's struggles, but I feel like there's been a lot of talk from non-Sharks fans, from people outside of the Sharks fandom, talking about the Sharks are not going to go far because of Jones, blah, 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 blah. And this 5-game losing streak has certainly started up those talks. For me personally, yes, Jones has certainly struggled. He has been an average to above average goaltender in the regular season in his previous few years starting. This is his first year where he is certainly below average, but in all of his playoff seasons with the Sharks as well, he has been very good, not just above average, but extremely good. His first year, obviously taking the Sharks to the Stanley Cup Finals, was so good in that Stanley Cup Finals against the Penguins. He was the only good Sharks player against the Oilers in the first round in 2017. He was very good against the Ducks in the first round in 2018. He was okay against the Golden Knights in 2018 in the second round there. And so I do still have faith that he can bring it back. And in that first round against the Golden Knights, they definitely will need him to bring it back. And I mean, even in general, even if I wouldn't necessarily think that, it's not really fun to just sort of accept the fact that the Sharks are going to just believe the fact that the Sharks are going to lose. You have to have faith here. Otherwise, you're probably losing the fun that you're going to get to be able to watch that series. And so I do maintain faith in Martin Jones to be able to take the Sharks to the promised land, even if this season hasn't gone very well for him. Class dismissed.